Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Copilot Lead Speak. I'm Sarah Young. I'm a senior cloud security advocate here at Microsoft. And thanks for joining us again to learn more about Copilot for Security and AI security in general. Today, I've got two very special guests. We have Ryan and Mark, who are going to talk to us a little bit more about Copilot for Security. Now, gentlemen, before we go any further, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience and tell us what you do at Microsoft and why you're here today?
Yeah, so what I do at Microsoft, I kind of like to think of it as I fit in the space between spaces of different teams with product and engineering, with our customer field teams that help support the efforts in Copilot for Security. And I arrived here through kind of like a roundabout way. I got my start in IT, working on Exchange email systems of all things. I know I went through that process, and that got me into a lot of interesting things through PowerShell and automation. I naturally went into configuration and DevOps and scaling out enterprise infrastructure. And that allowed me to transition into this little internet threat intelligence company that looked at internet misconfigurations or internet configurations at scale. And we helped map threat intelligence and provide that to a number of different customers and ultimately to Microsoft.
That's awesome. Pretty interesting background there. I love hearing about people's backgrounds. So, Mark, how about yourself? Could you tell us a little bit about what you do at Microsoft?
Certainly. So I am a product manager in generative AI, working with Copilot for Security since the beginning of 2023. I worked very closely on a lot of the capabilities involving choosing individual plugins, interpreting prompts, matching that to user intent, and then invoking the underlying systems to answer those intent, retrieve data from our systems, and then compose an answer back in natural language. Prior to that, I worked on various aspects of threat intelligence, helping organizations build out processes, including enrichment pipelines and detection pipelines, and really working to understand the best ways of enumerating attacker infrastructure and creating defensive postures accordingly.
So, suffice to say, you've been pretty busy the last couple of years.
We really have. We really have. There is, unfortunately, no shortage of work in cybersecurity.
I think, yes, I think we can all agree with that. We're all pretty busy.
Quite.
Yes, thankfully we've got AI.
Indeed.
And that leads me very nicely into our first question. I'm going to take it right back to the beginning here, and it might sound like a very basic question, but why have we built Copilot for Security? And what problems are we trying to solve here?
Other than answering the really basic questions, we wanted to look across security ecosystems, which are highly complex, fragmented environments that have all these individual systems and databases and domain-specific languages that take a ton of energy, time, and efforts to stitch together in a best case that is hopefully harmonious in a way that you can secure your environment. In the absence of that, it's incredibly difficult to understand, and that's what we believe Copilot for Security does, to help redefine what security is and how security gets done.
So that's a little bit about what the problem is, but perhaps you can speak a little bit more about what we're proposing as the solution here, apart from a cool name and another Copilot to add to our list of Copilots.
Indeed. In many ways, what we are endeavoring to do is to create a new interface, a narrative interface, if you will, for the Security Operations Center. It provides an opportunity for someone to simply state in natural language what their intent is. Consider a scenario where a very skilled analyst comes in, joins a new team, a team that is deployed, say, Microsoft Intune for endpoint device management. That analyst comes in with all the experience they need to know just how relevant device information is to understanding the nature of the threat and guiding their incident response. But what they may not yet know is how to operate the specific tooling at the organization they're in. Because again, Ryan, as you said, heterogeneous environment, lots of different components. We're glad that that company that they're at is using Intune, but that might not be something that they're totally familiar with. The great opportunity with Copilot for Security is maybe they don't actually have to. They can simply present to the system a prompt in terms that they're already very familiar with. Is that device compliant? When was it last updated? Or if they're investigating a malware incident, they could simply ask the question, what other devices in my network have that same file on their operating system and look to the systems running behind it to provide the answer for that. That really is the vision for what we see Copilot for Security providing.
So we've mentioned a lot there. All the examples you gave there, Mark, were about the SOC specifically. But we're not just saying that Copilot for Security is just for the SOC, are we?
No, in fact, I liken it to everyone as an operator, just how Mark was talking about. You have different jobs and different tasks, and over time, you become an expert at that thing. And that's really what a SOC is. All of these specialists that have developed an expertise for security context. And what generally prohibits someone from going off and figuring out something new and becoming an expert at something else is the time to ramp up, the knowledge acquisition. That process is inherently laborious. So for an AI, the great thing that I see, and the great thing I really am looking forward to for Copilot for Security, is the ability to start to infuse a security context into any discipline, no matter what you do. So if you're an operator in an HR role, or in an IT position, or in a database management job, no matter the discipline, you will now have a security context infused to your everyday work.
So in a way, you could say, because I'm sure both of you have heard this phrase, we say that security is a team sport and that everyone has to participate to a certain extent. And so Copilot is really going to be helping with that.
It is indeed. It's actually going to help in some ways democratize security. It will enable a broader group of individuals to engage in the sort of activities that were at one point reserved for, again, as Ryan said, those specialists who had taken the time to really immerse and go deep in the systems. There will still be absolutely cases for that, but between those extremes, the possibility is really emerging for Copilot to provide that sort of narrative interface, and just by simply providing the prompts and the statement of what they're seeking, the system can respond with the answers that they need.
So would it be fair to say then that another benefit of Copilot is that it will help in many organizations address the chronic cybersecurity skills gap that we have worldwide?
Yes. And in fact, I think one of my favorite quotes in this situation comes from Jeffrey Snover. Scale times complexity eventually exceeds our ability to be successful in any endeavor. So where we started out in building Copilot for Security is that we targeted the tier 2 analyst because that's the most understaffed position in the SOC. And we had this perspective of, well, let's address the talent shortage and the staffing inside of security organizations. But really, as we started to move on and go into different operator contexts, what we started to recognize is that by putting the security context into everything everyone does, well, that's how you address the cybersecurity talent shortage. You provide everyone the capacity to understand security in whatever it is they do.
It's going to be very exciting and I think a big change.
It will certainly be that, and we're seeing that just in the change in which people are interacting with these systems. But the interesting thing, somewhat surprisingly, is how quickly the prompt has become, in some ways, a universal concept for people interacting with these systems. It's becoming a familiar practice for somebody to understand, to encounter, if you will, a prompt bar and say, oh, well, I know what to do there. I may not know, as you said earlier, how to frame a specific query language in, say, a KQL system. I may not know quite how to interrogate a specialized data set, but I do know how to use a prompt bar. And I do know how to state a question. And so I am going to provide that question into the system and expect it to create the outcome that I'm looking for.
Some customers might be a little bit worried because we have a lot of security tools, right? And we are, with Copilot for Security, some folks might think that we're adding another tool into the toolbox. And of course, we've always been striving to go the other way and move towards single pane of glass. So I'd be really keen to hear your thoughts about actually how Copilot is improving that rather than perhaps being detrimental by being yet another tool.
Well, I have heard often the noble goal of trying to get to a single pane of glass. I've been hearing it now for well over a decade. I've seen some organizations that have made some progress towards that, certainly, but it remains somewhat of an elusive goal. And I believe that one of the primary challenges getting in the way of that is the interfaces that they necessarily have to place on top of it. And part of that becomes not only the flexibility, but also scaling up new team members to engage with those interfaces. There's actually an emerging pattern where you will see multiple types of interfaces, more specialized perhaps for a certain incident response phase, or maybe for a specialized activity, such as threat hunting. You see organizations perhaps using Jupyter notebooks, or using Sentinel playbooks, or creating their own custom dashboards in maybe a data lake of some sort. And all of these are providing the necessary perspectives. We believe that creating that narrative interface for the Security Operations Center, or really for any other operators endeavoring to help advance their company's security mission, we believe creating that interface provides a powerful value add that, again, gives them the ability to simply render in natural language what it is that they are striving to achieve, and then let that act as, if you will, an obfuscation layer over the rest of their interfaces, and really begin to pull back the data that is relevant to what they need. It will be perhaps another pain, but it will be a pain looking out a different side of the house, if I can hazard extending the analogy just a little bit. And we think it's worth it. And the technology is novel enough, it is special enough, the capabilities are powerful enough. It's really worth leaning into and exploring what is possible here, because we are now able to do things we've never really been able to do. And it's time to give that a try, and it's a time to apply that within this context specifically.
Yeah, and I'm not holding a conversation with a single pane of glass. I'm going to all the inputs I need to. And a UX fundamentally will keep you within the confines of that system. With a conversation, you control the narrative, you control the direction, and ultimately the outcomes.
And in many ways, conversation itself is unbounded. You really don't know where things are going to go. As somebody who's frequently reviewing prompts within Copilot, and myself trying to ask, how do I guide the system to answering this? I know full well just how unbounded it is. But I also see prompts coming into the system and responses being constructed and conversations following from that I never anticipated. And neither did any of our teams that are creating plugins, those that are helping to create the outputs in the system. Nobody anticipated these conversations that you talked about. And that really is where the potential for this, I think, really begins to emerge.
The operator controls the narrative.
Indeed.
So it's really, really interesting. And Mark, to your point around being confined by doing things the way we've done them previously, it makes me think of a phrase that my dad says to me on a fairly regular basis. If you always do what you always did, then you always get what you always got. So looking at this from a different perspective and doing things slightly differently could be the way that we, at least maybe not fully solve, but definitely get further ahead at solving some of these chronic security problems that we've had over the years.
Right, and that's something that there has always been an effort to try something new, to engage a new technology in solving the problem. That's one of the things that has kept me engaged within the security space for so long, is that there's such a willingness and eagerness really in a lot of team members to just try something new. And that's led us to develop, I mentioned earlier, things like the playbooks, the entire SOAR ecosystem, security, orchestration, and automation and response. Tremendous promise, and still has a powerful place within an organization. But it can sometimes get a little staid. It can be a little bit fixed as a single point in time. And we understand that the attacks are always evolving. What we need is a more flexible interface into these systems that we've created. And we think that large language models, specifically GPT, and as rendered within Copilot for Security, creates possibilities that were simply never there before. And it's absolutely worth leaning into.
So most of our customers will have a lot of different tools in their environment, as we've just alluded to. But of course, some of them might be concerned about interoperability because historically that's always been a challenge. So what have we done on the Copilot side of things there?
Well, we have to address the heterogeneous environment and the high degree of fragmentation. This isn't just a Microsoft platform, it's a security platform for everyone. I like to think of it as a platform that's going to facilitate an infinite number of plugins connected to an infinite number of systems, third parties, and partners. So we want to provide whatever your endpoint solution is, because we believe that an AI platform has to look across the things you may not consider or your biases may exist. Think back to me in my email story. I will start with Exchange, but ask me to look into a different email system, and I am quickly lost. But I have the ability to consider all of those and scale out my capacity to consider them all without my biases, without my areas of expertise I may or may not have. Well, that is how you start to address the problem of fragmentation in an ecosystem, the consideration of all.
And one of the great things is we're seeing a tremendous amount of enthusiasm from Microsoft partners, from technology vendors that are eager to create experiences using generative AI, and they're looking for ways to accelerate their time to market. They're looking for ways to get these capabilities in front of customers faster, and they're looking to Copilot for Security as an optimal platform to do that. At the same time, even our customers are actively engaged, looking for that extensibility framework to be opened up to them. They've already written a bunch of Python scripts, maybe PowerShell scripts, running amok in their environment, right? They're very familiar with this pattern of developing their own bits of glue that can very powerfully and effectively tie together fragmented aspects of their system. And they're looking with great optimism and engaging with great enthusiasm in Copilot for Security. And we're really excited to see what it is that they're going to build on top of that.
So I'm going to ask you a question that may be in quite a few customers' minds. That is, there are a lot of Copilots out there. We've been making a lot of them for different things. So with Copilot for Security, are we just jumping on the bandwagon and making something in the security space? Or have we defined some real problems that it can help solve?
So the phrase hopping on the bandwagon is typically reserved for somebody who is following. And if you've been looking at this space for any time at all, you know that Microsoft is anything but a follower in the field of generative AI.
That's true.
And we have been innovating at just a breakneck pace. And I love that. In fact, my background is actually in smaller organizations. And so when I came to Microsoft, I was sort of expecting things to be a little bit slower of a pace, and that has so not been the case with this. It has actually been the opposite. And it is simply because even if it is maybe a solution in seek of a problem, it is such a powerful solution. And there are so many problems, not only in the domain of security, but really just in the domain of humanity generally. And that may seem a little ambitious, but when you look at the scale and scope and the intentionality behind which Microsoft is pursuing this vision, we do have big ideas and we do have big plans, and we're courageous enough to look very openly at a broad base of problems and say, hey, this technology might help there. Let's find out.
So Copilot is now generally available for everyone to use, and some people have been using it for a little bit longer through our private preview program. But Ryan, you work with the field and customers a lot. So how are you seeing customers use Copilot?
Well, the progression has been incredible along this developmental journey we've had with this security AI product. And I think one of the most profound stories and most profound takeaways that I've seen across this life cycle is effectively net new competencies that we've introduced. Not everyone inside of a security organization or even outside of a security organization knows how to write a report or summarize what's occurred in an investigation. Similarly, unless you're more Kendrick, you probably can't go and analyze PowerShell or Python or any of that in a format that a threat actor would use against your environment to precisely know what exactly it is they're doing and trying to achieve, and doing so in a way that not only expedites resolution, but exposes it for the first time for any analyst to readily consume, assess, and progress.
In many ways, it's been a catalyst for a change of process. It has activated, as you said, entirely new capabilities. And I think that customers have been, in some ways, almost surprised by the potential for the technology to impact them so specifically. It's typical that you would expect a product to offer a certain feature that creates a certain outcome, but it is a novel thing entirely when you have a system that is almost capable of creating its own features. And in many ways, that's a lot what they're experiencing.
Well, Ryan, Mark, it's been a pleasure. I've learned so much again. Could definitely talk to you all day. In fact, that seems to be the case with all the guests we have on. But in the interest of time, I think we'll have to wrap it up there. So yeah, thanks again for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And for those of you at home, thank you very much for tuning in to Copilot LeetSpeak. We've got plenty of exciting episodes to come, so keep tuning in if you want to learn more about AI security. Until next time, take care, and we'll see you again.